The fire had taken everything from Nora Bennett, except her life, and some days she wondered if even that was a mercy worth having. She stood at the edge of Montana City in the autumn of 1878, her worn carpetbag clutched in scarred hands, watching smoke curl from chimneys into the crystalline Montana sky while trying to summon the courage to walk down that main street one more time. The scars ran from her left temple down her neck and disappeared beneath the high collar of her black mourning dress. The fire 18 months ago had consumed the small farmhouse she had shared with her husband Thomas outside of Helena, trapping her inside when a burning beam collapsed across the doorway. Thomas had been in town that night, drinking away what little money they had, and by the time neighbors saw the flames and pulled her free, half her face and neck bore marks she would carry forever. Thomas had taken one look at her in the doctor's office and walked out. She found him 3 days later, swinging from a rope in their burned-out barn, unable to face a future with a wife he could no longer bear to see. Nora had tried to rebuild some kind of life. She worked as a seamstress in Helena for a year, but the other women whispered behind their hands, and mothers pulled their children away when she walked past, as if tragedy and disfigurement might be contagious. She had answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher in Butte, but when she arrived for the interview, the school board took one look at her face and told her they could not have someone so unsettling teaching their children. A position as a housekeeper in Virginia City ended after 2 days when the lady of the house said Nora's appearance disturbed her digestion. Montana City was her last hope. The advertisement in the newspaper had been simple. Cook needed for ranch outside Montana City. Room and board included. Apply to Dalton Xavier, XXX Ranch. She had written immediately, and the response had been brief but encouraging. Come prepared to work. Wages fair. There had been no interview, no questions about her circumstances, and Nora had allowed herself the dangerous luxury of hope. Now, standing in the cool October afternoon with autumn leaves skittering across the rutted road, she made herself walk forward. Montana City was small, just one main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a livery stable, and a handful of other buildings clustered together as if for warmth against the vast Montana wilderness. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow, and the wind carried the scent of pine and coming winter. She walked to the general store first, needing directions to the XXX Ranch. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the woman behind the counter looked up with a welcoming smile that froze on her face when she saw Nora clearly. The woman's expression shifted through shock, pity, and discomfort in the span of a heartbeat. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice carefully neutral, her eyes fixed somewhere over Nora's left shoulder. "I am looking for directions to the XXX Ranch," Nora said, keeping her chin up despite the familiar burn of shame in her chest. "I have employment there. The Xavier place." The woman's eyebrows rose. "That is about 5 miles northwest of town. Follow the main road out and look for the sign at the fork. You cannot miss it." She paused, and something almost like concern crossed her face. "You are going to be working there, as a cook," Nora confirmed. The woman opened her mouth as if to say something more, then closed it again and nodded. "Well, good luck to you then." Nora thanked her and left, feeling the weight of the woman's stare between her shoulder blades. She had no horse, so she began walking, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step. The road wound through open grassland dotted with sage and wildflowers gone to seed. Cattle grazed in distant fields, and once she saw a pair of riders on the horizon, too far away to distinguish more than their silhouettes against the sky. The sun was lowering toward the mountains when she finally saw the sign. Triple X Ranch, carved into a weathered wooden board and hanging from a crossbar between two tall posts. She turned down the narrow road, her feet aching and her dress dusty from the journey. The ranch house came into view as she crested a low rise, and she stopped to take it in. It was larger than she had expected, a two-story structure of dark wood with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings dotted the surrounding area, a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and various sheds. Despite the late afternoon hour, the place seemed strangely quiet. No one worked in the corrals. No sounds came from the barn, and the windows of the house stared back at her like empty eyes. Nora walked to the front porch, climbed the 3 steps, and knocked on the door. She waited, smoothing her dress with nervous hands, adjusting the scarf she wore to partially conceal the worst of her scars. Footsteps sounded inside, heavy boots on wooden floors, and then the door swung open. The man who stood there was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer thunderstorms. He wore worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and an expression of such open weariness that Nora felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. He looked to be in his early 30s, with the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. A shadow of stubble darkened his jaw, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. "Yes," he said, his voice rough, as if he had not used it much lately. "I am Nora Bennett," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I wrote to you about the cook position." His gray eyes met hers directly, moved over her face with a quick, assessing glance that took in the scars without lingering, and then returned to hold her gaze. "Dalton Xavier," he said. "You came all the way from Helena." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment longer, and she braced herself for the dismissal, the sudden remembering of another applicant, the awkward excuses she had heard so many times before. Instead, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in. You must be tired from the walk. I should have offered to send someone to fetch you from town." Nora stepped inside, so surprised by the simple courtesy that she nearly stumbled. The interior of the house was dim after the bright afternoon, and she blinked as her eyes adjusted. They stood in a large front room with a stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and a general air of neglect. Dust lay thick on every surface, and the curtains were drawn against the light. "Place is a mess," Dalton said, almost apologetically. "My father died 3 months ago, and I have been trying to run the ranch myself. Cooking and cleaning have not been priorities." "I am sorry for your loss," Nora said quietly. He nodded, accepting the condolence with a brief tightening around his eyes. "The kitchen is through here. I will show you around, and we can discuss terms." He led her through to a large kitchen that must have been beautiful once. Now dishes were piled in the sink, the floor needed sweeping, and the whole room had the sad, abandoned feel of a space that had once been the heart of a home. Nora set down her carpetbag and looked around, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "My mother loved this kitchen," Dalton said softly. "She died 2 years ago. My father never really recovered from losing her. I think he just gave up." "It is a fine kitchen," Nora said honestly. "It just needs some care." Dalton turned to face her fully, leaning back against the counter and crossing his arms over his chest. "I should be honest with you, Mrs. Bennett. This is not just about cooking. I need someone who can help restore some order to this house, someone who can make it feel less like a tomb. I have 6 men working this ranch, and morale has been low. They need decent meals and a sense that this place is still a home, not just a business." "I can do that," Nora said. "The wages are $30 a month, plus room and board," he continued. You would have your own room upstairs. I expect 3 meals a day for myself and the hands, keeping the main house clean and helping with any other household tasks that come up. It is hard work, long hours, especially during branding and roundup seasons. I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Xavier. He looked at her again, and this time his gaze was more careful, more searching. Can I ask what happened? You do not have to tell me if you do not want to, but I prefer to know the people I employ. Nora lifted her chin. There was a fire. My husband and I had a small farm outside Helena. I was trapped inside. By the time I was pulled out, I had these burns. She gestured to her face and neck. My husband could not bear to look at me afterward. He took his own life 3 days later. I have been trying to find work ever since, but most people prefer not to have someone like me around. Dalton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. My father lost his left arm in a ranch accident when I was 10 years old. Some people treated him differently after that, as if he was less of a man because he was not whole. It made him angry and bitter for a time. But my mother told him that his scars meant he had survived something, that he was still here, still able to love and work and live. She said that took more courage than most people ever had to show. Tears pricked unexpectedly at Nora's eyes, and she blinked them back hard. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. He straightened up and held out his hand. The job is yours if you want it, Mrs. Bennett. I do not care about scars. I care about whether you can cook and whether you are willing to work hard. Everything else is just noise. Nora took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the firm grip that spoke of strength tempered with control. Thank you, she said, and her voice broke slightly on the words. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Call me Dalton, he said, releasing her hand with a slight smile that softened the hard lines of his face. Mr. Xavier was my father. Now let me show you to your room so you can settle in. Supper is in an hour, and I warn you, the pantry situation is grim. Tomorrow I will take you into town so you can stock up on whatever you need. He led her upstairs to a small but comfortable room with a window that looked out over the ranch yard toward the mountains. The bed was neatly made with a faded quilt, and there was a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a wardrobe, and a small table with a lamp. It was simple, but it was clean and private, and it was more than Nora had dared to hope for. Wash up and rest for a bit if you want, Dalton said from the doorway. I will be in the barn if you need anything. After he left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry, just for a moment, releasing the tension and fear and desperate hope she had been carrying. Then she washed her face, unpacked her few belongings, and went downstairs to see what she could salvage for supper. The pantry was indeed grim, but she found flour, some dried beans that had seen better days, a precious tin of lard, salt, and some jerky that was tough as leather but still edible. In the root cellar she discovered potatoes, onions, and a few withered carrots. It was not much, but she could work with it. She built up the fire in the stove, set beans to soak for tomorrow, and began making biscuits with practiced efficiency. While they baked, she fried slices of jerky with the onions and potatoes, creating a simple but hearty hash. The kitchen began to warm and fill with the smells of cooking food, and Nora felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Some knot of tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. She was setting the table when boots sounded on the porch, and the door opened to admit not just Dalton but 6 other men, all dusty and tired from a day's work. They stopped when they saw her, surprise clear on their faces, and she saw the now familiar sequence of reactions as they took in her appearance: shock, curiosity, discomfort, forced neutrality. Dalton moved through them to the table. Men, this is Mrs. Bennett. She is our new cook and housekeeper. "Mrs. Bennett, these are the ranch hands, Charlie, Frank, Miguel, young Tom, old Tom, and Joseph." They mumbled greetings, removing their hats, and Nora nodded to each in turn. "Supper is ready," she said. "Please sit down." They ate with the focus of men who had been living on their own bad cooking for too long, and despite the simplicity of the meal, there were actual sounds of appreciation. Old Tom, a grizzled man with a magnificent white mustache, looked up at her with something like reverence. "Madam, these are the best biscuits I have had in 6 months," he said solemnly. "If you can cook like this with what was in that sorry pantry, I fear I might propose marriage before the week is out." Several of the men laughed, and Nora felt heat rise in her face, though whether from pleasure or embarrassment she could not say. "I appreciate the compliment," she said dryly, "but I am afraid I must decline. I have had my fill of marriage." More laughter, easier this time, and Dalton caught her eye across the table with an expression that might have been approval. The meal continued with conversation flowing around her, talk of cattle and fences and a problem with one of the water sources in the north pasture. The men included her naturally in the rhythm of the household, asking her to pass things, thanking her for the food, treating her not as a curiosity or an object of pity, but simply as a person doing her job. After supper, the hands retreated to the bunkhouse while Dalton helped her clear the table. "You do not have to do that," Nora protested. "This is my work. My mother would haunt me if I let a lady clean up alone after her first day," Dalton said, carrying plates to the sink. "Besides, I want to make sure you have everything you need." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Nora washing while Dalton dried and put away. "The men seem kind," she said finally. "They are good workers," Dalton agreed. "Loyal. They stayed on even after my father died when they could have found easier positions elsewhere. They deserve better than what I have been able to give them lately. You have been managing this ranch alone since your father passed." "Mostly. I have a foreman, Charlie, the older fellow with the dark beard. He helps with the day-to-day operations. But the business side, the planning, the decisions, all of that falls to me now." He set down the plate he was drying and rubbed the back of his neck. "Some days I am not sure I am equal to it. My father had a gift for this work. I am still learning." Nora looked at him, seeing the exhaustion in the lines of his face, the weight of responsibility he carried. "I think you are doing better than you believe," she said quietly. "A man who cannot manage would not inspire the loyalty you have from your workers. And a man who cannot lead would not have offered a job to a scarred widow without hesitation." Dalton met her eyes and something passed between them, some recognition of shared loneliness and determination. "Thank you, Nora. May I call you Nora?" "Yes, of course." "Then welcome to the XXX Ranch. I hope you will be happy here." That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the wind whisper around the eaves, Nora allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could belong. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and deeply satisfying. Nora rose before dawn to start breakfast, feeding the hands enormous meals of biscuits, gravy, fried potatoes, and whatever meat was available. She spent her mornings cleaning the house room by room, beating back the dust and neglect, opening curtains to let in light, polishing furniture until it gleamed. She baked bread, made stews and roasts for dinner, created pies from preserved fruit she found in the cellar. The pantry she had stocked on that first trip to town began to look well used rather than simply full. The house transformed under her care. Curtains were washed and rehung, floors were swept and mopped, windows sparkled, and the scent of beeswax and fresh bread replaced the musty smell of abandonment. The men began to linger in the kitchen after meals, talking and laughing, and the bunkhouse rang with card games and conversation, instead of the sullen silence that had characterized the previous months. Dalton watched these changes with an expression Nora could not quite read. He worked from dawn until after dark, riding out with the men to check fence lines, move cattle, repair equipment. He came in for meals dusty and tired, but he always thanked her for the food, always asked if she needed anything. Sometimes in the evenings, he sat in the front room going over account books by lamplight while she mended clothes or worked on other household tasks, and they would talk about small things: the weather, the ranch, bits of local news. Nora found herself watching him when he was not looking, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the way he listened carefully when his men spoke, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. He never stared at her scars, never treated her as if she was fragile or pitiable. He met her as an equal, respected her work, and valued her opinions when he asked for them. It was dangerous, she knew, to let herself feel anything for him beyond gratitude. She was damaged goods, a widow with a tragic past and a face that made people uncomfortable. He was a rancher who needed a housekeeper, nothing more. But her treacherous heart did not listen to logic, and she found herself looking forward to meal times, to those evening conversations, to the sound of his voice and the rare gift of his smile. November brought the first real snow, a heavy fall that blanketed the ranch in white and drove the cattle down from the high pastures. The men worked long hours bringing in the herds, and Nora kept coffee hot and food ready at all hours. One evening Dalton came in late, covered in snow and shivering with cold. Nora was still up, darning socks by the fire, and she jumped to her feet when she saw him. "Goodness, you are frozen through," she said, pulling a chair close to the hearth. "Sit down. I will get you hot coffee and something to eat." "I do not want to put you to trouble," Dalton protested through chattering teeth. "Nonsense. Sit." She brought him coffee laced with a bit of whiskey, thick slices of roast beef between fresh bread, and a bowl of stew that had been simmering all day. He ate like a starving man while she draped a blanket around his shoulders and built up the fire. "You are going to work yourself to death," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "You need rest, Dalton." "There is too much to do," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, the coffee cup cradled in his hands. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find out I have lost it all because I was not strong enough or smart enough to keep it going." Nora sat down in the chair across from him. "You are both strong and smart," she said firmly, "but you are also only one man. You cannot do everything yourself." "I do not have a choice. Everyone has choices. You choose to carry this burden alone instead of asking for help. You choose to work until you drop instead of trusting your men to handle things. You choose to see your father's death as a failure on your part instead of the natural, if tragic, end of his life." Dalton opened his eyes and looked at her, and she saw surprise there, and something that might have been pain. "You do not pull your punches, do you?" "I have learned that life is too short and too hard to waste time on polite lies," Nora said. "You asked me to help make this house a home again. Well, part of that is telling you when you are being foolish." For a moment she thought she had gone too far, that she had overstepped the boundaries of employee and employer. Then Dalton laughed, a real laugh that lit his entire face and made him look years younger. "My mother would have liked you," he said. "She never let my father get away with anything either." Then she was a wise woman indeed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, Dalton spoke again, his voice softer. "Can I ask you something, Nora?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret surviving the fire? Do you ever wish you had not made it out?" The question was so unexpected, so raw, that Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. No one had ever asked her that, not directly. They had offered pity and prayers and awkward platitudes, but no one had acknowledged the dark truth of survival, the way it sometimes felt more like a curse than a blessing. "Yes," she whispered. "In the months right after, when Thomas died and I realized what my life was going to be like, I wished I had died in that fire. I wished I had not survived to see the disgust in my husband's eyes, to feel people flinch away from me, to know that I would never be normal again. And now—" She thought about it carefully, looking into the flames. "Now I think that maybe surviving means I still have something to offer the world. My scars are terrible, but they are proof that I am strong enough to endure terrible things. And if I can endure that, I can endure anything. I can build a new life. I can find moments of happiness. I can matter, even if I do not look the way I used to." Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Scars mean you survived," he said quietly. "They mean life tried to break you and failed. I do not see ugliness when I look at you, Nora. I see strength. I see courage. I see a woman who lost everything and still got up the next morning and kept going. That is beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with smooth skin or perfect features." Nora could not speak. Tears rolled down her cheeks, hot and sudden, and she covered her face with her hands. She felt him move, felt him kneel beside her chair and gently pull her hands away from her face. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not mean to upset you." "You did not," she managed. "I just never thought I would hear anyone say something like that to me. I never thought anyone would see me as anything but damaged." "Then people are fools," Dalton said fiercely. "You are not damaged. You are remarkable." She looked down at him, at his dear face with its strong features and kind eyes, and felt something shift in her heart, some wall she had built begin to crumble. "Dalton, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything." He stood, releasing her hands, and stepped back. "Get some rest, Nora. Tomorrow is another long day." He left her there by the fire, and she sat for a long time afterward, turning his words over in her mind like precious stones, hardly daring to believe them but unable to let them go. After that night, something changed between them. The easy companionship deepened into something more, something neither of them named but both felt. Dalton began to seek out her company more deliberately, sitting with her in the evenings, riding into town with her for supplies, and using the time to talk about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the operation, about his fears that he was not living up to his father's legacy. She told him about her life before the fire, about her love of reading and her secret wish to travel, about the garden she wanted to plant come spring. The hands noticed, of course. Old Tom winked at her one morning when Dalton lingered over breakfast, and young Tom elbowed Miguel with a knowing grin when Dalton helped Nora carry in firewood, even though it was not his job. But their teasing was gentle, affectionate, the ribbing of men who were happy to see their boss finding some measure of joy. Winter deepened, and Christmas approached. Nora had not celebrated the holiday since Thomas's death, but she found herself wanting to mark the occasion, to create something festive and warm for the men who had become her unlikely family. She baked for days, creating pies and cakes and cookies, roasting a haunch of beef to succulent perfection. She strung popcorn and berries to decorate the front room, and Dalton brought in a small pine tree that they set up in the corner. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the tree after supper, the Hands and Dalton and Nora, and sang carols in rough but enthusiastic voices. Charlie produced a harmonica and played while Miguel sang in clear Spanish. the words foreign but the emotion universal. Old Tom told stories of Christmases past, and young Tom admitted shyly that this was the best holiday he had ever had. Dalton caught Nora's eye across the room and mouthed, "Thank you," and she smiled back, her heart full to bursting with a contentment she had never expected to feel again. Later, after the men had retreated to the bunkhouse with promises to sleep off their full bellies, Dalton and Nora remained by the tree, watching the firelight flicker across the makeshift decorations. "This was a beautiful evening," Dalton said quietly. "You gave us all a gift tonight, Nora. You made this place feel like a home again." "It was my pleasure," she said. "I cannot remember the last time I felt so happy." Dalton turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "Nora, I need to tell you something, and I am probably going to make a mess of it, so please bear with me." Her mouth went dry. "All right. When I advertised for a cook, I was just looking for someone to make meals and keep the place clean. I never expected to find you. I never expected to feel the way I have come to feel." He took a deep breath. "You have become important to me, more than important. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I listen for your voice in the house. I find excuses to be near you. And I know I have no right to say any of this, because you have made it clear you are done with marriage and I am just your employer. But I cannot let another day pass without telling you that I have fallen in love with you." Nora stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Dalton, I am a scarred widow. I am damaged. You could have any woman you wanted, someone whole and beautiful." "I do not want any woman," he said, moving closer. "I want you. I want your strength and your kindness and your sharp tongue when I am being foolish. I want your smile and your laughter and the way you hum when you are cooking. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are here, that you chose to stay, that you chose me. Your scars are part of who you are, part of your story, and I would not change a single thing about you." "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to believe this is real. I am afraid you will wake up one day and realize you have made a mistake." Dalton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her scarred cheek in his palm. His touch was warm and careful, reverent, and Nora closed her eyes against the wave of emotion that swept through her. "Look at me," he said softly, and she opened her eyes to find his face inches from hers. "I am not Thomas. I am not going to turn away from you. I see you, Nora, all of you, and I am telling you that you are beautiful, you are precious, you are loved." "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I have tried not to. I have told myself 100 reasons why I should not, but I love you, Dalton Xavier, and it terrifies me." He smiled, that rare, wonderful smile that transformed his serious face. "Then we will be terrified together," he said, and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and careful, asking rather than taking. Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks as she kissed him back, pouring into it all the longing and hope and desperate love she had been holding inside. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she leaned into him, letting herself be held, letting herself believe that this might be real. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is too soon, and I know you said you were done with marriage, but marry me anyway. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were right to survive, that you were meant to be here with me." "Yes," Nora said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Dalton, I will marry you." He kissed her again, and they stood there by the Christmas tree with the fire burning low and the snow falling softly outside, two damaged people who had found wholeness in each other. They were married in January of 1879 in the small church in Montana City, with the ranch hands as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Nora wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple but elegant, in a deep blue that matched Dalton's eyes. She did not hide her scars, wearing her hair pulled back and her head held high. And when she walked down the aisle on old Tom's arm, she saw nothing but love and approval in the faces turned toward her. Dalton stood at the altar in his Sunday best, looking nervous and proud and so handsome that Nora's breath caught. When she reached him, he took her hand and held it tight, and they spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, pledging themselves to each other before God and the community. The townspeople who had stared and whispered when she first arrived now came forward with genuine congratulations. The woman from the general store, Mrs. Patterson, hugged her tightly and said she was glad Nora had found happiness. The preacher's wife said they made a fine couple. Even some of the ranch wives who had been standoffish before now welcomed her warmly. And Nora realized that by marrying Dalton, by being chosen and valued by a respected member of the community, she had been granted a kind of acceptance she had thought forever lost. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, held at the ranch with food and music and dancing. Nora danced with her new husband under the winter stars, his arms around her, his voice in her ear promising her all the tomorrows they would share. That night, in the bedroom that had been Dalton's alone and was now theirs together, he was gentle and patient, treating her like something infinitely precious. He traced the path of her scars with tender fingers and loving kisses, telling her she was beautiful until she believed it, until she could see herself through his eyes and know that she was truly loved. Spring came with a rush of green growth and new life. Nora planted her garden, setting seeds into the rich Montana soil and watching with delight as shoots emerged and reached for the sun. She and Dalton worked side by side, building a life together brick by brick, day by day. They talked late into the night about their dreams and fears, learning each other's rhythms and preferences, figuring out how to be not just husband and wife but partners in every sense. The ranch thrived under their joint stewardship. Dalton handled the livestock and land management, while Nora managed the household and started raising chickens, expanding their income streams. They hired another hand to help with the increased workload, and the Triple X Ranch gained a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. In the autumn of that year, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never carried a child to term before. She and Thomas had tried for years without success, and she had assumed she was barren. But Dalton was overjoyed, his excitement tempered with such careful concern for her well-being that Nora found herself reassured despite her fears. The pregnancy was not easy. She was sick for weeks, exhausted beyond measure, and there were nights when she lay awake wondering if her damaged body could truly sustain new life. But Dalton was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was ill, rubbing her aching back, reading aloud to her when she could not sleep. The ranch hands tiptoed around her like she was made of glass, and old Tom appointed himself her personal guardian, following her around to make sure she did not overexert herself. In May of 1880, after a long and difficult labor, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel Thomas Xavier, honoring both Dalton's father and Nora's late husband, acknowledging the past while celebrating the future. Dalton wept when he held his son for the first time, and Nora watched through exhausted, happy tears as her husband cradled their child with infinite gentleness. Samuel was a beautiful baby, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and he filled the ranch house with noise and life, and a kind of chaotic joy Nora had never imagined. She discovered depths of love she had not known she possessed, a fierce, protective tenderness that sometimes frightened her with its intensity. Dalton was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with Samuel when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rumbling baritone. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved toys from wood, and spoke to his son constantly, telling him about the ranch and the cattle and the wide Montana sky. The years unfolded like the pages of a beloved book, each one adding new chapters to their story. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere and helped his mother in the garden. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Rose, who had her father's serious gray eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. 3 years later came another son, James, who was all energy and mischief from the moment he drew breath. The house that had been so empty and sad when Nora first arrived now rang with laughter and argument and the thunder of small feet on wooden floors. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding into new pastures and building a reputation that brought buyers from as far as Denver and Salt Lake City. Dalton hired more hands, built a new bunkhouse, and began planning for the day when his sons might take over the operation. Nora found her place not just as a wife and mother, but as a pillar of the small community. She organized quilting bees and church socials, welcomed new families to the area, and became known for her kindness to those who were struggling or outcast. She never forgot what it felt like to be turned away, to be judged for something beyond her control, and she made sure that no one who came to her door was ever met with anything but compassion. The scars on her face faded slightly with time, becoming simply part of her features rather than the first thing people noticed. Her children grew up thinking their mother was beautiful because their father told them so every day, and they never understood why strangers sometimes stared. Samuel, at 6 years old, once punched a boy in town who called his mother ugly, and though Nora scolded him for fighting, her heart swelled with fierce pride. One evening in the summer of 1887, when Samuel was 7, Caroline 5, and James 2, Nora and Dalton sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played in the yard. It had been 9 years since that Christmas Eve when Dalton had first told her he loved her, 9 years of building a life together through joy and hardship, triumph and loss. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked quietly, watching the golden light paint the landscape. "Taking on a scarred widow when you could have had anyone." Dalton turned to look at her with an expression of such love and contentment that it took her breath away. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "You gave me back my life, Nora. You took a house that was just walls and furniture and turned it into a home. You gave me children and laughter and love. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." "I think it was the other way around," Nora said, reaching for his hand. "You saw me when everyone else looked away. You told me my scars meant I had survived, and you taught me that survival could be the beginning of something beautiful instead of the end of everything good." "We saved each other," Dalton said simply, "and I would not change a single moment of it." Samuel ran up to the porch then, his face flushed with exertion and his shirt dirty from playing. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow? You promised." "I did promise, did I not?" Dalton said, ruffling his son's hair. "We will go right after breakfast. You can bring your sister if she wants to come." "Can Mama come too?" Samuel asked hopefully. Dalton looked at Nora with a question in his eyes, and she smiled. "I would love to come," she said. "But someone needs to watch James. Maybe we can all go together next week." Samuel whooped with joy and ran back to share the news with Caroline, who was sitting in the grass making chains from dandelions. James toddled after them, his chubby legs pumping with determination, and fell into Dalton's waiting arms as he passed the porch. "More," James said, his word for everything from food to attention to the horsey rides his father gave him on strong shoulders. Dalton laughed and stood, hoisting the toddler high above his head, eliciting shrieks of delight. "More, is it? Well, let us see what we can do about that." Nora watched her husband play with their youngest child, watched her older children chase each other in the amber light, and felt a contentment so complete it was almost painful. This life, this family, this love, it was more than she had ever dared to dream when she stood at the edge of Montana City all those years ago, scarred and alone and desperate. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that make up a life fully lived. There were lean years when drought threatened the herds, and hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and wolves. There was the year Samuel broke his arm falling from a horse, and the terrifying week when Caroline fell ill with fever and they thought they might lose her. There were arguments and misunderstandings, moments of frustration and exhaustion, days when the work seemed endless and the future uncertain. But there were far more good days than bad. There were roundups where the whole family worked together, branding calves and sorting stock under the vast Montana sky. There were winter evenings by the fire with Dalton reading aloud while Nora sewed and the children played quiet games. There were spring mornings when the world seemed newborn and full of promise, and autumn afternoons golden with harvest and preparation for winter. Samuel grew tall and serious, taking to ranch work with natural aptitude and a deep love for the land. Caroline was spirited and smart, learning to read at 4 and devouring every book she could get her hands on. James was the charmer, sweet-natured and funny, able to coax smiles from the gruffest of the ranch hands. In 1889, Nora gave birth to one more child, another daughter they named Grace, who completed their family. The ranch hands who had been there when Nora first arrived remained loyal friends. Old Tom became the children's favorite, teaching them to ride and rope and telling stories that got more exaggerated with each telling. Charlie, promoted to foreman years ago, managed much of the day-to-day operations, allowing Dalton more time with his growing family. Miguel married a woman from town and started his own small ranch nearby, but he still helped out during busy seasons, and his children became playmates for the Xavier kids. Montana City grew from a small frontier settlement into a proper town with a school, a doctor, a newspaper, and even a small hotel. The railroad came through in 1890, opening new markets and bringing new people. But the XXX Ranch remained a constant, a place of stability and tradition in a rapidly changing world. Nora became deeply involved in the town's development, serving on the school board and helping to establish a lending library. She taught Sunday school at the church and organized charitable efforts for families in need. People forgot about her scars, or perhaps they simply stopped mattering in the face of her contributions and character. She was Mrs. Xavier, the rancher's wife, respected and valued, and the scarred widow she had been seemed like a distant memory. But Nora never forgot. She never forgot what it felt like to be turned away, to be judged for something beyond her control, to feel worthless and unwanted. And because she never forgot, she made sure that anyone who came to her door, anyone who needed help or kindness or simply a listening ear, found it. The Xavier Ranch became known as a place where someone in trouble could find aid, where strangers were welcomed and fed, where second chances were freely given. One day in the spring of 1895, a young woman arrived at the ranch, dirty and exhausted, carrying a baby and sporting a black eye. She was running from an abusive husband, she explained haltingly, and had nowhere else to go. Nora took her in without hesitation, gave her a safe place to stay, and helped her find work in town and eventually get a small house of her own. The woman cried when she thanked Nora, saying she had knocked on 6 doors before coming to the ranch, and everyone else had turned her away. "I know what it is like to need help and be refused," Nora told her gently. "I know what it is like to feel like no one sees your worth. You are safe here. You are valued here, and you are going to be all right." Dalton, watching the exchange from the doorway, felt his love for his wife deepen even further. She had taken the pain of her past and transformed it into compassion, had turned her scars into a source of strength and understanding. She was, he thought not for the first time, the strongest person he had ever known. As the century drew to a close, the Xavier family gathered for a portrait at the photographer's studio in town. It was 1899, and Samuel was 19, preparing to take over more responsibility on the ranch. Caroline was 17, teaching at the schoolhouse and courting the young doctor who had recently arrived in town. James was 15, all gangly limbs and big dreams. Grace was 10, still more child than young woman, but showing signs of the beauty and intelligence she would carry into adulthood. Dalton and Nora sat in the center of the family group, their children arrayed around them, and looked into the camera with expressions of pride and contentment. Nora wore a high-necked dress that partially concealed her scars but did not hide them entirely, and her head was held high. Dalton's hand rested on her shoulder, a gesture of possession and protection and partnership. When the photograph was developed and framed, it hung in the front room of the ranch house, a testament to what they had built together. Visitors would look at it and see a prosperous ranching family, solid and successful. But Nora and Dalton saw more. They saw a scarred widow who had been refused everywhere until a cowboy saw past her disfigurement to her worth. They saw a lonely man burdened by grief and responsibility who had found purpose and joy in loving her. They saw survival and resilience, second chances, and hard-won happiness. The new century arrived with celebrations and optimism, though also with the inevitable changes that time brings. Old Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1901, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had loved. The children mourned him deeply, and Dalton and Nora felt the loss keenly, as if a piece of their history had been taken. But life continued, as it always does. Samuel married a practical, kind woman named Ruth, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property, starting their own family while working alongside Dalton. Caroline married her doctor and moved to a larger town where he could practice, but she visited often and wrote weekly letters that Nora treasured. James, restless and adventurous, went off to see the world, promising to return when he had satisfied his wanderlust. Grace grew into a lovely young woman who inherited her mother's strength and her father's business sense. And when she announced at 18 that she wanted to study accounting in Helena, Nora and Dalton supported her ambitions even though it was unconventional for a woman. Nora and Dalton grew older together, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who knew how close they had come to missing this, all of this. "We have had a good life," Nora said one evening in the summer of 1905. They were both 60, veterans of nearly 3 decades of marriage, grandparents now to Samuel's 3 children with more on the way. "The best life," Dalton agreed, pulling her closer. "Do you remember when you first arrived here? You looked so scared and so brave at the same time. I knew immediately that you were someone special." I remember thinking you were kind for giving me a chance, Nora said. I never imagined you would give me so much more. A home. A family. Love beyond anything I had dreamed possible. Scars mean you survived for me, Dalton said, repeating the words that had become a touchstone in their relationship. You survived so we could find each other, so we could build this life, so we could love each other. Every scar you carry is precious to me because it means you are here. Nora turned to kiss him, and in that kiss was everything they had shared and everything they would continue to share in whatever years remained to them. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and peaceful, populated with children and grandchildren and the legacy of their love. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the Montana sky stretched endless overhead. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it was meant to be. Years later, when they were very old and their children were middle-aged and their grandchildren were starting families of their own, people would ask Nora about her scars. The youngest grandchildren, who had never known her any other way, did not think them remarkable. But sometimes a curious child would ask what happened, and Nora would tell them the story simply and honestly. There was a fire, she would say. I was very badly hurt. For a long time I thought those scars meant my life was over, that I would never be happy or loved again. But then I met your grandfather, and he taught me that scars just mean you survived something hard. And surviving is the most important thing, because if you survive, you get the chance to find out what comes next. You get the chance to build something beautiful from the ashes. Dalton Xavier died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1912, at the age of 67, with Nora holding his hand. She grieved him deeply, as one grieves the loss of a soul mate, but she did not break. She had learned long ago that she was strong enough to survive anything, even this. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and capable, still offering wisdom and comfort to those who needed it. She saw Samuel firmly established as the head of the Xavier Ranch, saw Caroline's children graduate from college, welcomed James home when he finally returned from his travels with a wife and stories that made everyone laugh. She held Grace's first baby, a daughter named Nora after her grandmother, and felt the circle of life complete itself. When Nora Bennett Xavier died in her sleep in the spring of 1920, at the age of 75, 3 generations of family gathered to mourn her and celebrate her life. They told stories of her kindness and strength, of her resilience and love. They spoke of how she had transformed the Xavier Ranch from a house into a home, how she had welcomed strangers and helped the downtrodden, how she had loved fiercely and completely. They told of how he had said that scars meant she had survived for him, and how that simple recognition of her worth had transformed both their lives. They spoke of it as a love story for the ages, proof that true love sees not with eyes but with the heart, and that the greatest beauty is often found in the strength to endure. The XXX Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passing from Xavier to Xavier, each one carrying forward the legacy of love and acceptance that Nora and Dalton had built. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Montana mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, people swore they could still feel the presence of those 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, who had built something lasting and beautiful in the wild heart of the American West. Their story became legend in Montana City, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But at its core, it remained a simple truth, that love can heal the deepest wounds, that acceptance is the greatest gift one person can give another, and that surviving something terrible can be the beginning of something wonderful if you are brave enough to try again. The ranch house that Nora had filled with life and laughter stood for another 50 years before it was finally torn down and replaced with something more modern. But before it was demolished, Samuel's granddaughter walked through the rooms one last time, remembering the stories she had heard about her great-grandmother. In the kitchen where Nora had cooked thousands of meals, she found carved into the wooden window frame, barely visible but still there, a single line: "Scars mean you survived for me. DX." She traced the letters with gentle fingers, feeling the connection to a past she had never witnessed, but always known. Her great-grandfather had carved those words where his wife would see them every day, a constant reminder of the love that had saved them both. That piece of wood was saved, preserved, and passed down through the family, a tangible link to the love story that had started the Xavier legacy. And every Xavier child grew up hearing about Nora and Dalton, about courage and acceptance, about looking past the surface to see what truly matters. In the end, their story was not really about scars at all. It was about two lonely people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose to see the best in each other, who built a life of meaning and purpose out of pain and loss. It was about the transformative power of love, the importance of second chances, and the truth that our wounds do not define us unless we let them. Nora had been refused everywhere, turned away by a world that could not see past her disfigurement. But Dalton had seen her true self, had recognized her strength and worth, and had offered her not just employment but love, acceptance, and a future she had thought was lost forever. In choosing her, he had saved himself as well, pulling himself out of grief and isolation into a life of joy and connection. Their love had rippled outward, touching their children, their community, and generations yet unborn. It had created a legacy not of wealth or power, but of compassion and acceptance, teaching by example that the most important thing we can offer each other is the simple recognition of shared humanity. Montana City grew and changed, becoming part of the modern world, but the Xavier name remained synonymous with integrity and kindness. The values that Nora and Dalton had embodied became woven into the fabric of the community, influencing how people treated each other, how they welcomed strangers, how they responded to those who were different or struggling. Their story, in the end, was a testament to hope, to the possibility of redemption and renewal, to the incredible resilience of the human heart. It reminded everyone who heard it that it is never too late to start over, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that the courage to survive is the same courage that allows us to truly live.